Welcome back to Data Security Decoded. If you remember from our previous episode, we were diving into the next installment of this special edition with Renata Spinks, an established leader in cybersecurity who recently transitioned from a role as the Deputy CIO for Information Command, Control, Communications, and Computers at the United States Marine Corp. In this episode, we'll continue speaking with Renata and really focus on her current role as the CEO of CyberSec International. At the end of our last episode, Renata and I discussed the innovations in cybersecurity that came about as a result of equal innovations in ransomware on both sides of the coin. Her current role is focused on transformation and innovation for organizations, and I wanted to ask her how much of that revolves around resiliency and what she sees as core focus areas in these topics. In your current role with CyberSec International, where you're the CEO, your job is transformation and innovation. How much of that transformation and innovation revolves around resiliency, and what are you focused on in those areas?
Great question. As you heard me mention, continuity of operations and planning is an area that CyberSec International, we have experts on our team that not only consult from an advisory perspective, but they have also been, I would say, boots on the ground and involved in many operations to where they were either doing tabletop exercises or providing features in many different companies that are focused on understanding your critical path. What is your asset inventory? And when I'm saying asset inventory, I'm not just speaking about your equipment. I mean your actual data sets. You start to see the chief data officers, being hired and put into these many different organizations. And sometimes that can be confusing. You can hear a little feedback about, well, what does this chief data officer do? Or what's their responsibility versus the CISO's responsibility? And what we do is we come in and help you understand how to work in tandem with each other and understand categorization of data, tagging data, but more importantly than the tagging and the categorization, if you just so happen to get that wrong, or you want to change it, it's an ever evolving concept. But the ability to, no matter where your data resides, no matter if it's tagged or not, if it's properly categorized in your opinion or not, it is so critical to understand how the data will be used and how to protect it as much as possible. You said it right. The terms that we're using today are not new, but the concept of how you can respond to a potential ransomware attack, that hasn't been something we've concentrated on besides probably, I would say, the last 5 years. So being able to understand your assets or information of assets is critical. But not only understanding your data, but how you're utilizing it, where it actually resides, but then also what happens when you can't access your data, and what happens, or how do you respond when there's a threat? And more importantly, can you even recognize when there's a potential threat? So intrusion detection and prevention, or the detection piece of it, has always been about something weird is happening on your network. The critical piece for CyberSec is to teach you something weird is happening with your data. Not is Steve accessing the data, but is that particular data set or the computational portion of your data, is it executing the proper way? And if it's not, is it because we have a code change? Because most times that's what the problem is. Is it because that actual if and else statement has been adjusted? And if it was it adjusted by your programmer, or was it adjusted by a actual adversarial threat that's inside of your actual application or having access to your source code? And so that leads me to just kind of teaching organizations why code review is so important, why the importance of understanding what's happening with, no longer is code being compiled, right? Most times code is being, you have your GitHubs out there, you have your developers that are compiling versus creating. And that comes with some risk. You're going to hear that word themed throughout our conversation today as we continue, that we're taking calculated risks. But as we think about the policies that are needed to be put in place and the actual activities that need to be complied with, that's what cybersec is helping organizations understand. And then after we understand it, we're there to also help them implement side by side the CISO and the data officers. But even if it's not in the C-suite, we definitely understand that those that are closest to the network are also very valuable, and they are very important to build partnerships with. So outside of those chief offices, we make sure we're talking to the program managers. We want to have those conversations with the engineers, and we want to come in and do some fact finding and some exercises and just kind of evaluate anything that could be done differently or better in response to being more proactive instead of reactive. And then showing people those indicators that you have a potential problem. And if it ends up that there's not a problem, and it just makes us better on how we manage our zeros and ones, or the way we manage code and how it's brought into an organization, that's great. It's not always an indicator that you have a challenge. It could just be your procedures or policy needs to be updated, or it's an opportunity to evolve. Because sometimes when we think about policy, I would like to say, let's modernize the technology and let the policy catch up. Well, nowadays, I kind of need you to do it in tandem. I need the policy people in the room updating policy while we're identifying how we're going to get better. And that's what CyberSec is about. You can't innovate in silos. So we have to have everyone on board and bringing what they contribute to the fight on a consistent basis. And all those changes, I think they have to happen in real time.
Well, I'm excited CyberSec is out there working these challenges, because everything you're mentioning, these are consistent themes we see come up again and again and again in research. Organizations struggle to understand their data estate. The data boundary is the actual defensive boundary. You can't talk data and talk about a single team. That's just not the way anything works. And so you have to bring these teams together. You have to have playbooks. You have to have plans. So these are areas that we just hear, literally every day. One of the things that also comes up quite a bit, and I know workforce management is a real passion area for you. So I just want to kind of dive right into one of the consistent questions we hear around that, which is the talent shortage. I've been hearing about the talent shortage as long as I've been in cybersecurity. Literally going back 20 years. It's something you hear about at every conference. I'd be really interested from your perspective, with 20 years of doing workforce management, do you agree with that kind of almost accepted truth now that in security, we have a talent shortage? What do you think about that?
Well, there comes the eye rolls. In the space of it's like, here we go. We're going to talk about workforce and diversity. Yes, we're going to talk about that because we have to talk about it. And you use the word shortage, Steve. I don't think we have a shortage of talent. I think there's a lot of talent out there. I think we have a shortage of vision, I think that if we don't go to the spaces underrepresented or under-resourced areas, we're missing out on many of opportunities where people, there are kids out there that are doing things that are just amazing. And a great example is I volunteered at DC All-Stars one time in the past couple of weeks. And I had to ask one of the kids to show me how to work the kiosk for me to get into the building. Because it was, in my opinion, it was fancy. I really don't know how, what am I supposed to do? And it was one of the teenagers that was like, oh, Miss Spinks, I'll help you out. You just do this, put that there, and then you have to do, he was just moving so quickly across that kiosk screen. And it just it took me back a little bit because, oh my goodness, although he is probably 13, 14 years old, that level of innovation from that one kiosk that doesn't look like most kiosks that we are accustomed to, bring that talent into a cybersecurity space just by teaching them what's happening on the back end of that actual terminal or kiosk or whatever we're going to call it. Just a little bit of investment. So over the past 20 years, what I've seen is an evolution of talent. I've actually, the past 5 years with the Marine Corp was something that the Commandant focused on. There was white papers out. It was included in his actual, what we call intent. The Department of Navy Secretary, everyone is having that conversation about that inability to bring in or fill the positions that we all have now open. But I don't think it's a talent shortage. I think the talent is out there. We just got to figure out, how do we get into those communities? And you know what, Steve? It is not an easy problem to solve. It's not one of those easy buttons. The adversary, like you said, gets a vote. The skill sets that have to be taught, there's a level of access to that has to occur. But I'll say something that I haven't touched on before in any of my talks. And it's because someone brought it to my attention. Sometimes when we're in these spaces, the things that are occurring on the networks and the data that is being accessed is so critical to our national security that you can't just hand it over to anyone. And that is a challenge when we think about the security clearance process. And you know this very well. When we think about making sure that data doesn't fall into the wrong hands just because we're trying to put butts in the seat, right? So that's a delicate challenge that leaders have to understand. And I'm appreciative of that person who kind of pulled me to the side and said, well, you can't just train everyone just because you're trying to put butts in the seat. We do have a reason why we take a methodical approach to the areas where, from a matter of national security, and that is where most of the talent shortage is. It's touching the realms of national security. And so we have to be very vigilant on our access controls, the way we assess personnel. And so what that highlights to me is that we are not only just thinking about workforce and the talent shortage or the talent challenges that we're having or the skills challenges that we're having when we think about national security. And even the companies that you may not need a security clearance in industry, for example, like Rubrik, there's a background investigation that's going to occur, right? And because of that due diligence, those things, and it's normal. You're not being discriminated against. You're not that special person no, everyone goes through the same level of observation for access. And when you're supporting national security, it's pretty much the same thing. And whether you're inside the building and you have a .gov or a .mil email address, or if it's Rubrik.com or CyberSecInternational.com, like we said at the very beginning of our conversation today, we're all cyber warriors. And so we have to truly think about that as we're looking at the many different communities where maybe underrepresented and maybe under-resourced, but we also have to balance that with, well, where are those pockets of access that we have to be a little bit more diligent? And then those pockets of access where the level of risk is not as high. And so I think about those things now when I have these different conversations. And so now, as I have gone into many communities and talked about human resources and the management of such, I'm also talking to kids about making sure that they're doing the right thing and understanding what it means to support national security and work in cybersecurity. And I will tell you, the community that I'm from, Little Jonesboro, Louisiana, those kids were not even thinking about that. They weren't thinking about when they get in trouble in school, how it can affect the ability to progress forward in any type of technology pursuit that they would want to pursue later. And so it was kind of heartbreaking for me when I had kids from my high school who are now in high school asking me those many different questions because they have a fear of the government. Their perspective of government is, oh, you were fed. And just having those kinds of conversations to say, oh, it's not a negative thing. This is how you can serve your country. Oh, I don't want to go to the military. Well, you don't have to go to the military. You can serve at the state and local government. You can serve at the federal government. But the first thing you have to do is make sure that you're doing the right thing and that your character integrity reflects what you want it to reflect. It does go back to the fact that we are trying to solve a talent and a skills problem, and the statistics and numbers don't lie. So.
Yeah, there's one particular piece of that I would really like to just tap into with your experience. You've done lots of work with underrepresented communities, lots of work around bringing diversity in the workforce in the right ways. One thing I've heard you talk about repeatedly, it's come up in this conversation, we've talked about it before, and I've heard you discuss it in other forums, is around bringing those underrepresented communities into prominent and visible roles. I'll make sure I'm trying to get your words right. I pulled that up a previous interview you did. And I thought that was really interesting because it's not just about like, let's just get a more diverse workforce. It's that prominent and visible role that I've heard you mention a couple of times. As you focused on that particular aspect, what has that experience taught you?
That experience has taught me, it's taught me so much from many different avenues. One is we do have a underrepresentation problem. That's known. The numbers don't lie. But it's very difficult. I just spoke at Mary Talk the other day, and Sharon Woods kind of gave some advice to the female leaders in the room or people who are aspiring to lead in cybersecurity or information technology STEM fields. And she said, don't opt out. Don't think you're not good enough, and don't self-sabotage. And it just kind of struck me that that was her closing argument or her call to action to anyone. And I start to think about that, and you see that. You see sometimes it is, Steve, this is hard stuff. It's not easy. It's very unfortunate when people talk to me and they say, oh, but you make it look so easy. I am sorrowful that I make it look easy, because it is not by no means easy. The technology is complex. It's a dedication of your time and energy. And this, in order to get really just to compete in this space, it's time consuming. You're taking in consideration all of that. I mean, you're trying to get into the head of an adversary. Think about that. You're trying to anticipate so many actions and then add zeros and ones and programming to that, the policies, the personnel, the approvals, the compliance, the regulatory. I mean, it's just so much for you to consider that it can be intimidating. So not only can it be intimidating, but it is, I will admit, it is hard. So I want to go on record to say this is not anything that is easy. One of my mantras for CyberSec International, you'll see on our logo, it says complexity simplified, because we acknowledge that it's complex and we work really hard to simplify things as best as possible. And so that's where it's kind of been gut wrenching. But I also have had experience where it's very important that when you think about underrepresented communities, whether that's a number of women that are not in executive leadership roles, or if you're considering the level of diversity when it comes down to just a male-dominated field, those things are important. And I don't think we can change those numbers if a young lady doesn't see another young lady. If they don't see a woman in a prominent and executive leadership role, it is very difficult for me to believe that they will feel like they can do it too. A great example is Caitlin Clark. A great example is the dynamics of women's basketball that has changed. Yes, I love women's basketball, by the way. And the dynamics that changed. And when you start to see these posters of, I want to be like, I am Caitlin Clark, right? When I saw that, I thought about technology, because little kids would walk up to me and say, I want to go to the Marines. And then I would have a whole conversation about why that's a great idea and why serving in the cybersecurity space and the most recent changes to actually having an MOS or an actual study that where you can compete to become an actual cybersecurity warrior by job title within the services is an option now. And so I think the reason why I like to emphasize prominent roles is because you can't be what you can't see. And I truly believe that. My decision to apply to become a cyber technology officer to the United States Marine Corps was because I had met Lieutenant General Reynolds at a CIAA conference where she spoke, and I had never seen a high-ranking female in the Marine Corps. My perspective was all Marines are men. And even in technology, all Marines will be men. And for her to talk about communications and for her to just, I was enamored. And so when I saw her, it was, I actually could probably qualify for that position. Whether I got the position or not, I'm definitely going to compete for it because I feel like I qualify. So if we have more of that influence in the space, then we will add more women to prominent roles. And doing so does mean you may not come in at the top. I want to be very clear. Maybe you can't apply to immediately to a senior executive role because there's experience that's needed, there's qualifications that's needed. But we can provide each other with the role, the playbooks, like you said, and the different roles and level of experiences that you can start to achieve so you can rise to those occasions of when those vacancies open. And so that's what's been most important to me is in order to get, what's the path of getting there? Because the prominent roles are important, but also the path of getting there is important. And if we opt out very early because it gets a little too hard, then I understand that. If we opt out because the responsibilities of what we think we have to carry every day outweighs the time consumption that's needed to study such a very complex academia study like cybersecurity, I would challenge everyone to think through anything in life that's not going to be hard. Anything that you want to become, whether you want to be a lawyer or a doctor, it's going to take studying, it's going to take dedication and things like that. So don't opt out. I encourage everyone to just keep pushing through because nothing in life doesn't come with hard work and due diligence. And so that's my call to action. Most times when I think about not only am I advocating for prominence of position, but also highlighting the fact that we can all work through it together. I didn't do anything by myself. The curriculums were difficult, but they were not unachievable. Continuing to stay abreast with what's happening in industry is definitely not unachievable. We have information at the tips of our hand. I mean, podcasts like this and the things that Rubrik are doing on their website, all that information is at our disposals where 20 years ago, we didn't have so much information at our disposal. So I think it's very important that we do have an impact for women and cybersecurity leaders and in STEM. And it's not just because of the equality piece. That's part of it. A matter of fact, that's 100%, if I can say. But the reason behind it is when you bring in diversity of thought and diversity of leadership, the fact that I think very differently, I don't like to focus on, well, it's because I'm a girl or it's because I'm a guy. Although that is very evident, I am not dismissing that there are challenges in that area. But semicolon space, I really don't concern myself if it's a Marine that's giving me the truth or a 3-year-old that's saying that's hot. Okay, it's hot. Don't touch the stove because it's hot. It doesn't matter if that's a 3-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 20-year-old. The fact of the matter is the stove is hot. You probably don't want to touch it. And so I take that approach with technology and STEM. I acknowledge that we have some numbers that we would love to see climb. I understand and I acknowledge the fact that as women in technology, we are underrepresented. I also acknowledge the fact that the reason that is important has nothing to do with because it's girls. The reason that's important is because of what we bring to the table, the different ways that we live our everyday lives with the very men that are dominating the industries that we're talking about, whether that's a sister, brother, cousin, husband, whatever. I think we all are in this together. And so why not be together in the fight, in the room when we're talking about cybersecurity? So I like to kind of focus on both sides of that coin. Yes, it's based on gender for whatever reason, historically or not. But we have opportunities now to impact that. And I think it starts with closing the gap. And in order to close the gap, people have to be able to see that something is possible, or 9 times out of 10, they won't pursue it.
Yeah, I just could not agree with all that more. I think it really maps to proven outcomes too. I mean, this is, I think, both the right thing to do and also the effective thing to do. And I think we see that over and over and over again. And I love the concept of don't opt out. I mean, that could absolutely, be a bumper sticker on the back of the car because I think it's so simple and so powerful. And if you're going to mention Caitlin Clark, there's no way I'm not going to mention my Chicago Sky. We're excited to have Camilla, excited to have Angel Reese. I know this isn't a sports podcast, but I'm a diehard Chicago Sky fan. So before I get in trouble here, turning into my passions for Chicago sports, We've kind of gotten in a habit on this session, ending with the same question. We kind of stumbled into it, but we found it to be a really interesting perspective as we're talking with senior leaders, folks who have learned things the hard way, have lots of lessons learned. And so I'd love to kind of end this discussion with, as you look back at the last 10, 20 years and where we've come and what we've done and the things we've failed on, the things we've won on, and then you look forward 10, 20 years, are you optimistic or pessimistic for what is coming in the future?
That's a real loaded question. I think the scales for me is more optimistic. I am an optimistically pessimistic person, if you can understand that. The reality is we got challenges, but I am truly confident that the steps that we are taking nationally, as well as state and local, as well as outside of the federal government into the industry and private sectors of the world, I see a shift because in the information security space, I do not see an adversary that's considering, well, I'm not going to try and thwart the security within the government, and I'm going to leave Rubrik alone today. We're not seeing that. We're seeing across the scale attacks, whether that's what we've seen recently in many of the attacks in some private industry and commercial. But when you think about the Department of Defense Information Network, the DODIN, DISA, Defense Intelligence Security, you are seeing that the adversary doesn't discriminate. They are truly attacking us. The state actors are on their job, be it may. So I'm optimistic that we are looking through all of the different opportunities to get better. I think we are investing a lot in taking on the challenges of newer technologies and emerging technologies. I will tell you, I've observed just in the federal government, the adoption of newer technologies a whole lot faster than what we've seen in the past years. Just Mr. Sherman highlighted the authority to operate process and how important reciprocity is. That is a big deal because the ATO process can keep a lot of features and technology off of the network that are needed because sometimes it just takes too long for the authority to operate to be achieved. So that's just one example of how we are looking at ways to get better and faster. And so because of those type of examples, the many platforms that are out there, I focused on Rubrik today because this is a area where I actually love the labs and some of the things that are happening. But there are many competimates out there that are offering many other different capabilities that I think are also needed.
Yep.
And because of that, I'm very optimistic that we're going to get better and better. We're all going to see more partnerships. We're going to see that workforce paradigm start to continue to elevate with opportunities from many diverse backgrounds. And all of that is going to do nothing but make us better and keep us not only thinking like the adversary, but I think it'll keep us ahead of the adversary. We're not trying to beat the adversary from that perspective, but we are trying to fight and win. And sometimes there are battles that we kind of take an L on, and maybe there are some successful intrusions and there are some successful breaches, but we get better. And I think as we get better and better, as we looked across industry and take those lessons learned, we're starting to, build resiliency into the way we think about our infrastructures and how we operate within our infrastructure. But we also have, I think, an optimistic way of calculating risk and addressing risk beforehand. And podcasts like this one definitely helps in that area where we get to share with each other some of the things we're seeing and add a little bit of diversity of thought. So I'm very optimistic in the midst of my optimistically pessimistic personality.
Well, I appreciate the kind words on the research and on the session. And I can't say enough. Thank you for joining us today. It's been great kind of revisiting some of my old stomping grounds in the government and military and really talking about where all this is going. So we really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, and really appreciate the way the conversation has gone and the opportunity to talk about some of the things in the past I really didn't get to dive in on. So I appreciate it.
And for all of you that joined us in this session today, we really appreciate you joining us today for Data Security Decoded, and we'll chat next time. Thank you.